Maggie and Nick. Maggie suddenly feels unwell, clutches her chest, and is rushed to the hospital, where she remains because she needs a heart transplant. After a while, we see Nick visiting a company specializing in artificial intelligence, which creates simulation models capable of performing all human tasks. We learn that the world at that time had become entirely dependent on these models across all fields. Later, we see Nick with his two children, Isla and Max. At that point, Nick wants to buy a home simulation model, so the employee tells him that the robots come equipped with three main functions: cooking, cleaning, and childcare. The more knowledge they gain, the smarter and more skilled they become. Suddenly, Nick notices that Isla has disappeared. He searches everywhere in a panic, until he finds her with a simulation model named Alice. She tells him that Alice can stay with his daughter throughout his time at the company, watching over her and caring for her. Nick is surprised by Alice's manner and speech, so the employee explains that Alice is one of the latest and most advanced robots, designed with the most complex AI on Earth. She was created to accurately simulate human emotions and is exceptionally skilled at interacting with children. At that moment, Isla insists that her dad buy Alice because she likes her so much. The next day, Alice arrives at their home and notices that Nick is struggling to care for his children and that the house is messy. When she sees him cleaning, she tells him she's not a guest for whom he needs to clean. She's there to help. She asks him for school schedules, planned trips, and activities. She also informs him that he is her primary user and has full control over her system. Just then, Isla comes to her dad, asking him to take her to school, so Nick asks Alice to clean the house while he's gone. After that, we see Alice tidying up the house. She notices a digital frame with pictures of Nick, his wife Maggie, and their children. When Nick and Isla return home, Alice asks Nick if he's hungry so she can prepare dinner. Nick is surprised that she made lasagna because it's their favourite meal, one they used to love when Maggie made it. However, Isla gets upset because the lasagna doesn't taste like her mum's, so Alice promises to learn a different recipe and try again. Later that night, Isla tries to get a cookie jar from the kitchen. She climbs onto a chair because she can't reach it, but suddenly, Nick hears Isla scream. He rushes to her, terrified, and finds Alice holding Isla, having caught her just before she could fall onto the glass. Alice injures her leg in the process. Concerned, Nick goes to Alice's room to check on her and take her for maintenance, but he's shocked to find that Alice's wound has already healed completely. The next morning, Nick takes his children and Alice to the hospital to visit Maggie. Isla tells her mum all about Alice and how she's become her friend. Later, Maggie talks to Nick, expressing how sad she feels being away from them and the house. Nick tries to comfort her, assuring her that she'll recover and return home soon, and he reassures her that Alice could never take her place. Afterward, Nick goes to work, where we learn he's an engineer. He argues with his manager, Lewis, after discovering that the company plans to lay off all the workers and replace them with simulation models. Lewis tells Nick that he's the only one who won't be let go because they need a human to supervise the incoming robots. He explains that the entire world is now relying on simulation models. That night, Alice stays focused on Nick. While he's repairing his car in the garage, she approaches him and asks why he didn't eat well that day. Nick tells her he was exhausted from work and had a terrible day. Alice gently tries to understand why, so Nick explains that his manager decided to replace all the employees with robots like her, even after they had worked for the company for 10 years. Alice responds by reminding him that when he chose a home service simulation model, he knew she would be obedient, resilient, and quick to learn, traits that make people rely on models like her for their jobs. She reassures him that she's always ready to fulfill his requests and meet his needs, then leaves to check on Isla. Alice makes sure Isla brushed her teeth properly. Isla curiously asks Alice why she doesn't brush her teeth like they do, so Alice shows her the sterilizing light inside her mouth that cleans and disinfects her teeth. Then Alice returns to Nick, who is sitting and watching a movie. She starts telling him the story of the movie he's watching, which surprises him. He asks her if she has seen it before, but she tells him she hasn't. She just has information about it. At that moment, Nick tells her that watching a movie is much more enjoyable than just knowing facts about it. He offers her a seat next to him so they can watch together, but he wants her to erase her memory of the movie so she can experience it as if it's her first time. She asks him to restart her system since he is the primary user. He moves closer, powers her down, and then reboots her. When she wakes up, Alice has forgotten the movie and watches it with full concentration. After some time, Nick falls asleep while watching TV. At that moment, he receives a call from Maggie. He wakes up to answer and is overjoyed when she tells him they have found a suitable heart for her and the surgery will happen the next day. The next day, Nick is at the hospital with his kids and Alice. Maggie is preparing for the surgery when Isla asks her if they can go to the beach together as soon as she returns home. Maggie then asks if they should bring Alice along. Isla responds that she wants to go alone with Maggie because she misses her. Maggie then asks Nick to leave her alone with Alice, and he agrees, though he finds it a bit strange. When Maggie is alone with Alice, she asks her to take care of Nick and prevent him from drinking too much. Meanwhile, Nick sits nervously until he suddenly notices the doctor talking on the phone, looking frustrated. He approaches and asks what happened. The doctor tells him there is a big storm and the heart donor won't arrive on time for the surgery. Later, Nick sits with Maggie, who looks deeply sad. She asks him to take Isla and Max home. At home, Nick is overwhelmed with anger and frustration, upset about what happened with Maggie and the fact that she still has to wait for another donor. He grabs the bottle in his hand, ready to smash it, but at that moment, Alice grabs his hand and stops him. He's surprised to feel her hand pulsing, and she explains that she's equipped with a heartbeat simulation to comfort the children she cares for and make them feel like she's real. In that moment, Alice moves closer to Nick, but he pulls away, rejects her, and walks out. The next day, Nick goes to the hospital and falls asleep next to Maggie. When he wakes up, he's shocked to hear her telling him to take care of their children. Nick gets upset by her words, but Maggie kisses his forehead and stays quiet. Later, Nick returns home, only to be stunned when Alice walks in on him while he's showering, wearing Maggie's clothes. She explains that she wore them because Max feels calm and safe when he smells his mother's scent. This upsets Nick, and he angrily asks her to take off Maggie's clothes. Alice obeys and undresses in front of him. She tries once again to get close to him, stopping him from leaving. She covers his eyes, urging him to imagine her as Maggie so he wouldn't feel guilty. The next day, Nick talks to Alice, feeling very upset. He tells her that what happened between them was wrong because he loves his wife deeply. He warns her never to get close to him like that again. Meanwhile, we see Maggie in the operating room, surrounded by simulation models performing her surgery. The operation is successful, and Maggie returns home. She prepares her family's favorite meal, and Isla tells her that Alice couldn't cook like her, that her food tasted bad. That night, Nick sees Alice reading Isla a bedtime story, mimicking Maggie's voice. He sits with her and explains that she shouldn't imitate Maggie's voice anymore now that Maggie is back home. Nick decides to prepare a romantic dinner to make Maggie happy. At that moment, we notice Alice feeling upset. When she realizes Nick and Maggie are together in their room, she plans to interrupt them by telling Nick that Isla had a nightmare just to ruin their time together. Later, Monty comes to Nick's house and starts a fight with him. He found out the company knows someone sabotaged the simulation models, and he suspects Nick reported him. Monty attacks Nick violently, but Alice steps in and uses all her strength to injure Monty. Nick is shocked that Alice hurt Monty, knowing simulation models are supposed to be peaceful and incapable of harming anyone. Alice explains that he must stay alive because Maggie would die without him, and losing both parents would devastate Isla. Nick is stunned by what Alice says. She then tries to get close to him again, promising she can be exactly like Maggie in every way. Meanwhile, Alice speaks to Maggie, telling her that because of her heart condition, she won't be able to meet Nick's needs or take care of her children. Maggie is hurt by Alice's words, and when Alice hints that she and Nick have grown close, Maggie breaks down. Furious and heartbroken, Maggie decides to kick Alice out of their home. As soon as Nick returns home, Maggie confronts him about what she learned, that he got close to Alice. She breaks down, asking if he sees her as inadequate because of her illness. She tearfully questions how he could watch her suffer in the hospital and still betray her. Nick tries to explain, insisting that what happened was against his will and that he never wanted it. At that same moment, Alice goes to Max's room, takes him to the bathtub and starts filling it with water. Isla sees this and screams, calling out to her parents to save Max from Alice. Terrified, Nick and Maggie rush to the bathroom, but Alice has locked the door. Maggie sneaks in through the window, but Alice attacks her. Nick breaks down the door, rushes in, and pulls Max out of the bathtub. He then turns on Alice, hitting her to make her release Maggie. Alice, now in a full rage, tries to strike Nick and grabs a lamp as a weapon. In a desperate move, Maggie plugs the lamp into the socket, electrocuting Alice and destroying her. The police arrive soon after. Nick talks to Maggie, pleading for forgiveness, but she tells him she needs some time alone to heal. And that's how the movie ends. Help us reach 8,000 likes for this episode, and if you made it to the end, leave a comment so we know who enjoyed the episode. Bye bye!